Hello, I'm Paul, and in this video lesson I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Photoshop CS interface, in this case Photoshop CS5. Now, as you can see, this is our main image editing window in the middle here, and we've got various palettes open that allow you to see what you're doing with your image as you're editing. Over here on the left we've got the Tools palette, which I'll look at in more detail in a minute. We've got various images open in our main editing window. This is one we're going to work on to start with. And we've got various palettes open here, and the most important of which arguably is the Layers palette. Again, I'll talk about that in more detail shortly. And along the top here we've got a menu bar which gives all sorts of other options, and again I'll talk through those just very briefly in a minute. But to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the Tools palette and look at some of the more important and useful tools before going on to talk about some of the other elements within this interface. The Tools palette contains all of the tools that require you to interact with the image in some way, either by clicking on it or selecting it and so on. And it can be divided into rough areas. There are some selection tools, crop tools and sampler tools up here, various brush and editing tools here, pen, text tools and path tools here, and some history brush tools here, plus the foreground and background colour palette, which allows you to set various colours, and also comes in very useful when creating layer masks. And each of these tools, or many of them, have little black arrows which give you a further drop down menu, and they also each have an options bar along the top which allows you to set the parameters of each of the tools. So for example, if I select the brush tool, it gives me parameters for size, a blending mode, opacity, flow and so on. And there are different options for all of these different tools. And I'm just going to whiz through them, talk about the sort of useful ones in a bit of detail and whiz through the less important ones one by one. So the top tools here, there's a marquee tool which allows you to create selections of various shapes, rectangles, ellipses and so on. There's a move tool which allows you to move images, layers and selections around, or even type. And probably the first sort of interesting tool we come to are these lasso tools. If I click on the main freehand lasso tool, it allows you to create selections using a lasso, and you can do that manually. And if you right click, you can just deselect it, and you can also do it point by point, sort of joining the dots if you want to make a selection of, say, the sky, so that you can make adjustments to the exposure of the sky and the colours without affecting the foreground. Obviously you do this zoomed in at 100% to do it more accurately, but this is to give you an idea of how it works. You just need to remember to join them up to create the selection. Again, just right clicking deselects it. And there's also a magnetic lasso tool which allows you to sort of draw a bit more quickly, sort of freehand along a horizon, say, and it will try and cling to the edge of the object you're trying to select out. And again, you can bring that around to the beginning to create the selection. I'll just deselect that. Very similar selection tools here. There's a quick selection tool and the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool is the most automated and it allows you just to click on an area you want to select, and it will try and guess which parts of this area are of a similar tone and colour, but not the foreground's information here. Now you can set the tolerance of this up here. I might want to go to 20 and click, and now 20 is actually selected too much because the sky and the sea are very similar in tone and colour. So I might want to go back to 10, say, try that again. And to add to it, I just hold down the Shift key, like so, and to take away from it, I just hold down the Alt key, like so. So Shift key to add, and I can just add the various areas like this, and you can see it does a pretty good job of selecting things like so, just adding different areas. And I can then use that selection to selectively adjust the sky, but not the foreground, as an example. I'm just going to deselect that. The crop tool probably needs no explanation. This can be used to simply click and drag, and then drag in the corners to crop. If you want to constrain the proportions so that your cropped image is the same shape as the original, just hold down the Shift key like that, and you can see that makes no difference to the overall shape. And when you've finished with the crop, you can just click the tick up here, and there you have a cropped image. The eyedropper tool allows you to select specific colours from an image and perhaps apply them to the same image or a different image. Next we'll move on to the sort of cloning tools here. Now cloning tools, this particularly these healing brush tools are brilliant for cloning out sensor spots. So if I select the spot healing brush, and actually I'll just zoom in first. I'll zoom in on my sky, then you'll see a sensor spot, and I can hold down the space bar just to move that around so it's where I want it. Select the spot healing brush, and then I can use the slider up here or my square brackets just to set the size of this spot healing brush, make it about the same size as the sensor spot, and click, and hey presto, that is gone. And I can do the same thing with the sensor spot down there. Now, this healing brush is particularly good in areas of open space, but around edges it can sometimes clone out an edge and paste it onto the bit that you're trying to repair, in which case this clone stamp tool can be very useful. Let's say I want to clone out this bit of seaweed here. Again, I can make it bigger just by clicking on the right square bracket and then press Alt to click and clone out this area of sea here, and then just paint across to clone out my seaweed. And as I say, that's particularly effective around edges where you need to take a bit more control and not let the program work out which areas you want to actually clone. Next up is the brush tool, and this is obviously useful for using it as a brush, as an artist brush, and you can set various parameters, size, hardness up here. You've got all sorts of presets and options for shape and texture and so on here. You can just close that up. And again, you've got options for blending mode, opacity and flow. So you really have a great deal of control over how you want this brush to behave. And the brush is also essential for creating layers and layer masks, which I'll touch on briefly in a minute. Down here we've got history brush tools, which allow you to undo changes you made to the image sort of selectively. We've got eraser tools, which you can use to erase parts of the image, literally like an eraser, but generally masks are a better way of doing this because masks aren't permanent. You can chop and change and edit masks, whereas once you've made a change with the eraser tool and saved it, that's pretty much it, permanent. There's a paint bucket tool, which allows you to fill in shapes with various colours, and there's a gradient tool, which allows you to create a gradient. Say if you want to have a gradient that goes from dark to light in the sky, you can use the gradient tool. If I just select that, and there are various options within the gradient tool, foreground to background and so on. And again, this gradient tool is very useful for creating masks if you want to, say, apply a gradient to the sky so it gets darker at the top and lighter down towards the horizon. There's a few options here that might be useful if you want to actually work on the image by hand. There's a blur tool, sharpen tool and smudge tool, and these allow you to actually work away on the image by hand using your mouse. And there's the dodge and burn tools and the sponge tool. And the sponge tool, you probably won't use that often. It just allows you to sort of saturate the colours in the image, or desaturate indeed, as you can see from the mode menu up here, various flows. But more useful are the dodge and burn tools, which allow you to darken or lighten specific parts of an image by painting over them. So if I go to the dodge tool, for example, and hold down the spacebar just to scroll down to the foreground here, and I can use this dodge tool. I can set the brush size. I can decide what I'm going to lighten. So in this case, I might want to lighten the midtones, and I can set the exposure. Generally, it's a good idea to keep this quite low for dodging and burning, so you can build up gradually, and you can just paint over some detail, over this lichen here, just to lighten things up slightly. And as I say, it builds up very gradually, so you can really take control over the tones in selected parts of your image. The next tool I'm going to talk about is the pen tool here, and this is key to the full version of Photoshop because it allows you to make selections, to actually draw selections around objects and to create paths that you can then use for cutouts. And it's particularly useful because these cutouts can be scaled up or down without actually affecting the pixels. The lines you draw using the pen tool aren't pixel lines like they might be with a pencil or brush, for example. But if I select the pen tool and go to my portrait, and if I zoom in on an area like the arm, for example, and I say grab the pen tool, and the pen tool is particularly useful for creating cutouts of objects with curves in them like so. And you can make various points like this, and it's a very accurate way of creating a cutout. And you also get a work path saved over here in the Paths palette. And you can actually, by holding down the control button, you can toggle these around and get a very accurate curvature. You can see how that's moving the curve there, and you can do this. You can fine tune this all the way around a cutout to get exactly the cutout you want, all the way around, say, the model's arm and so on. Now over here we've got Type Tool. The Type Tool allows you to set various options, obviously different fonts, different strengths, sizes and so on. Over here we've got a Path Selection tool, which allows you to select paths that we've created using the pen tool. And we've also got a Shape tool, which allows you to create various shapes. And we've got various 3D tools for creating 3D objects and for web use and so on. And we've got the Hand tool, which simply allows you to move around the image. As I said before, you can shortcut this by grabbing the spacebar, and of course you've got the Zoom tool, which allows you to zoom in and out. Now right down at the bottom here we've got the foreground and background colours, and these are essential for creating layer masks, and I'll show you very briefly how that works. If you click D on your keyboard, that sets the default black and white foreground and background colour. You can toggle between them by doing that, or by pressing X on your keyboard. Now once you've done that, you can then go to work on creating a layer and a layer mask. If I select background and go to filter, layer, duplicate layer, click OK, and I've created a background copy that I can now work on. I can edit without fear of affecting my original background layer. Now, as an example, let's say I want to blur out some of the model's features while keeping her eyes and lips sharp. Let's say I just want to soften her skin tone slightly. I can select the background copy, go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur, and I can blur out a certain amount. Let's say, I'll exaggerate it so it's really clear exactly what's going on. Let's go for around about 20 pixels. Click OK, and we've now created a blurred layer on top of our background layer. Now, cleverly, what we can do is we can apply this blurring just to selected parts of the image, and to do that we can create a layer mask. So if I click on the mask icon down here, that adds a layer mask, and now what I can do is I can use a black paintbrush. If I select the brush tool and set it at a suitable size using my square brackets, I can now, let's zoom in, I can now paint onto the image using the black foreground colour, and you can see it's just revealing the sharp eyes beneath, like so. And I can do that around the detail areas. And it's obviously exaggerated. I've overdone the blurring just to give you an idea of how it works. But you can see all I'm doing is I'm creating a black mask in the mask here, and that's blocking out the blurring that I've just applied in this layer to reveal the sharp layer below. And that's, in a nutshell, how masks work and how this foreground and background colour can be used to create them. Okay, so that's our tools palette in a nutshell. If I just go across to the cathedral shot now, I'll whiz through some of the options up here, some of the menus. We've obviously got the file, open, save, and automate. Automate's quite useful for creating HDRs and photo merges, and for batch processing images. And we've got various options for undoing, step forward and backwards. And in the image menu here, we've got various adjustments we can make to the levels, curves, which I'll show you briefly in a second, vibrance, hue, saturation, and so on. And there's also options here to adjust the image size and canvas size, and to rotate the image, and so on. Particularly useful actually in the edit tool here is the transform tool. If I just make a selection, a rectangular marquee to select my whole image here, if I go up to edit, transform, and you see there's various options here, rotating, flipping, and so on. And here I can go to skew, for example. Now I'm just going to zoom out slightly by holding down the Alt key, just so we can see what we're doing. And I say, go to edit, transform, and skew, and now I can drag these corners out. And you can see the effect it's having, it's just straightening the verticals, the converging verticals in my cathedral shot. And there is something called perspective, but this actually gives you a bit more control because it allows you to tweak both independently. Click the tick, and there's our corrected image with the verticals vertical rather than converging. Now we've got other options along here. We've got a layer menu, which allows you to duplicate layers and create new adjustment layers, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a second when I talk about the layers palette. We've got filters, you'll use these a lot, and there are various artistic filters, blur filters, distortion, noise, and so on. We've got a liquefy filter for liquefying shapes, body shapes, eyes, and so on. And we've got various other options along here, a 3D menu specifically for creating 3D artwork and for web use and so on. And we can view various options. We can view rulers, for example, or turn those off. And we've got a window tool which allows you to set up your workspace and decide exactly what it is you want to see in your workspace, and particularly over here in the layers palette. Now I mentioned the image adjustment options up here in the drop down menus, and also the new adjustment layer options, which are very similar, and all of these changes can be applied in layers, so adjustment layers that don't affect the background. So for example, if I go to raw start, for example, I can click on this half moon icon down here to create an adjustment layer, and one of the adjustment layers that's very effective and that you don't get in Elements is curves. Now I can click on this curves option here, and this brings up a curves histogram, and as you can see, it's created an adjustment layer above my background layer. So any change I make here won't actually affect the pixels, it'll just be applied on top of my original image. And the beauty about this is it can be edited at any time. So long as we save our file in a format that allows us to save these layers, I can come back and edit this curves line at any time. Now curves is particularly useful for independently tweaking the highlights, midtones and shadows of an image to make it more dramatic. And you can see you can add as many points as you like along here to make a flat image, and just tweak the tones just to make things a bit more vibrant and a bit more contrasty. And you can use the eye icon here to toggle this adjustment on and off, like so. And you can add as many different adjustment layers as you like, and you can also mask them out so that the adjustment layer is applied only to certain areas and not others, again using the layer masks that I described earlier. Okay, so there you have it. That's CS5's interface in a nutshell, and I realise that it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it'll give you some idea of the sort of features that are available and where they are, so that you can start experimenting with them yourself and use them to start editing and creating some really memorable images.